It's not surprising that pharmaceutical companies today are embracing new technologies like continuous manufacturing.
It's a quantum shift in the way that manufacturing's been done.
The question has been not if continuous processing takes off, but when.
You're going to get these biopharmaceutical drugs at a much cheaper cost.
A lot of companies are apprehensive about a new technology when it's not clear how that will be regulated in other parts of the world.
FDA and other regulators have talked about continuous, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to be on the bandwagon.
The pharmaceutical industry has historically taken a cautious approach to most new advancements, but now it's embracing the possibilities of continuous manufacturing technologies. While traditional batch-based processes are still the industry standard, there are several products on the market that have utilized continuous manufacturing practices in their development. Over the last decade, this approach has generated a considerable amount of attention. To take a deeper look at the issues surrounding continuous processing, American Pharmaceutical Review has spoken with some of the industry's thought leaders on the subject. We spoke with experts from regulatory, manufacturing, consulting, market research, and technology providers. Here is their unique take on the topic.
Continuous bioprocessing is very important to the future of the manufacturing of biologics because it gets after one of the fundamental requirements in the market, which is how we can get the cost of these drugs down, which means that there's going to be more access to these drugs across the world, which I think is critical.
The biotechnology industry for many years has based its processes on batch processes, and traditionally these were all based on large stainless steel plants. And if we cast our mind back about 20 years or so, single-use technologies were introduced, and at the time there was a lot of skepticism related to single-use, the adoption of single-use. But I think we've seen that over the past 15 years, maybe 10 years, that single-use technologies have become widely established and adopted within the industry space. And now many new processes are developed based on single-use technologies. If we now look at other industries where the desire and the strive has always been to increase process economics, improve productivity, decrease costs, the traditional batch industries have migrated to continuous ones.
Continuous manufacturing has a very long history. The first reports of continuous manufacturing dates back to somewhere around the late 1700s. Continuous manufacturing, of course, has been established in many other industries like automotive, and petrochemical, food, and so on. And all of these have modern continuous manufacturing processes. As for the pharmaceutical sector, we first heard of continuous manufacturing in the pharmaceutical sector somewhere around 2008, I would say. And by 2009, FDA decided that it was time to develop a regulatory framework to enable continuous manufacturing. And now here we are, we have several approved applications, a lot of interest in continuous manufacturing.
The definition of continuous processing is something that is actually being actively discussed at this point in time, particularly as there isn't currently a written down definition within a guidance from the FDA or any other regulatory agency. People are still looking at ICH to take this up as a topic. This is something that we discuss quite often, and in some respects, people like to keep this as broad as possible because it could help to encourage adoption of the technology. And so from that standpoint, they say that any process where things are continually coming in and exiting at the process at the same rate would be defined as a continuous process. To some extent, I agree with that, but I think that you have to be careful because that allows you to essentially draw a box around anything and call it a continuous process, and your entire factory could be considered a continuous process. I really think it has to do with having a process that has some interaction between the upstream and downstream elements. If your process gets to the point that you have some sort of holding tank or something in the middle where the upstream doesn't have any effect on the downstream process, you're starting to get to the point where maybe at best you have two different continuous processes that have some sort of linkage, but it's not necessarily one continuous process.
Over the years, we've seen what I would consider steady implementation of making portions of the biomanufacturing process continuous. And at the development scale, we're seeing some examples of folks taking that crude harvest through final UFDF in a pseudo-continuous or semi-continuous manner. I think we are not quite at the point where we can compare ourselves to the petroleum or food industry in terms of continuous manufacturing, but certainly we've seen evolution of individual unit operations becoming continuous.
Continuous bioprocessing is definitely an evolutionary change within the industry. It is not contingent upon a single breakthrough discovery. So first, you have the process intensification. It's the paradigm shift and improvement of individual and separate unit operations. Second, you have the connection of sequential unit operations, so you start to connect chunks of the process together. And then thirdly is that you run those connected processes in a continuous flow-through fashion. So clearly it's a culmination of a journey, and it is very much an evolution as opposed to a single breakthrough change in the way that things are carried out.
A lot of the manufacturing processes are batch processes. They're very effective, they yield high quality product, and they're efficient processes. So there's not necessarily a need to change all existing processes to continuous processing. However, continuous processing does allow for a number of improvements in terms of minimization of scale-up and technology transfer work, therefore allowing shorter development timelines and improved transfers to manufacturing, smaller manufacturing footprints, smaller equipment sizes needed, therefore less energy usage, etc. So there are a lot of advantages. Each situation needs to be weighed to determine whether it makes sense to convert to continuous processing or to maintain existing processes.
Single-use technologies in a way are much more simple to understand, simple to comprehend. You can look at that device and decide, is this single-use device going to meet my needs? Are the products been tested and validated to product contact surface and all that stuff? So it's very incremental understanding, and it's transactional in a way. Continuous bioprocessing, I think the challenge is the technologies are so novel and the approaches are still so ill-defined that I think the industry has still got a, not just a wait and see attitude, they've got a, I'm excited to see attitude.
I think there is definitely room for different approaches to manufacturing. Manufacturing of new molecules. They're starting new programs, new molecules with very different features that are not easily adaptable to the existing old methods. That creates great opportunity to start considering continuous. Also, when they look to build new facilities, sometimes in new geographies. Again, it's at this point you have a biopharmaceutical company really starting from a clean slate. How do we build a process that's the most efficient, the most highest quality, kind of the most standardized? And again, that's a great time to be considering continuous.
There is not a requirement to adopt one process over another process. It is up to each company to develop an appropriate process. What we are interested is in the quality of the product that is coming out. Having said that, I would say that it's up to each company to decide whether they want to adopt continuous manufacturing. There are many advantages that the company might see in continuous manufacturing, but there's plenty of room for batch manufacturing as well.
Let's look at the existing products. Let's say existing active ingredients. If I have the volume or the product demand to go continuous, this means I have to develop the process, get FDA and the regulators to approve the process again. I have to prove the bioequivalency if I need to do that. This means it's going to cost me time, money, and effort to do it. And if I'm making money on my existing product, why should I change?
I think there's specific cases where continuous processing is solving a real need. The most obvious example is, labile proteins, which are inherently unstable, and perfusion manufacturing. So you are removing the product from that bioreactor where you could be at 32, 37 degrees Celsius. There's a whole lot of whether it be enzymes or other things in that milieu, as it were, that could degrade the protein, and you're getting it out in a continuous manner, and you're getting it through a purification process. You're solving a problem.
A big portion of it is around sort of liquid handling and how you actually control those. And if you can flow it through, then you don't need, for example, all the intermediate holding tanks, which reduces the capital investment, it reduces the footprint, it reduces the work in progress, and ultimately will reduce the cost. So you're going to get these biopharmaceutical drugs at a much cheaper cost, which is in line with where the market is going and where the expectations are overall.
As the industry begins to adopt these technologies, companies are discovering the many uses of continuous processing in both large and small molecule manufacturing.
Many companies, Lilly included, started working on the small molecule solid dosage forms as the first transition into continuous processing. That's where we've made most of our progress to date, as have other companies. However, there are applicabilities across large molecule processing in terms of both the manufacture of the API and then into the parenteral area with continuous formulation, continuous processing there. So although the small molecule solid dosage may be ahead of some of the other areas, there certainly is applicability across the entire manufacturing process area.
Moving to continuous for large molecules really presents additional opportunities in addition to pulling single-use technologies and special bioreactors and downstream purification solutions with this process analytical technologies to monitor for process quality and product quality attributes.
Now there are concerns, let's say, about the regulatory aspects of continuous processing and what the regulators say. I think it's very evident if you go to the major international conferences now that involve continuous or have major themes on continuous, that there are regulators present, regulators presenting on continuous. And we know that some of the regulatory authorities, particularly the Food and Drug Administration, do work on continuous processing with continuous processing equipment and generating data. So the fact that they're visible, they're receptive to discussion, I think addresses this potential area of concern.
Continuous processing in the pharmaceutical is a pretty interesting change in technology. One of the main drivers is the FDA and other regulatory agencies. As they continue to drive this, people that are skeptical continue to pay more and more attention to this as a new technology. And so I think that vendors can drive things by making things easier. Academics can help to drive things by helping to provide other understanding and models of how we do this technology. But if the regulatory framework is not there, it's going to be hard to make the business cases and allow organizations to do this. And so the FDA has been working very hard at that in recent years, and the rest of the world is trying to do that as well to make this a global enterprise where continuous can be done in all the markets around the world.
Ideally, think about, again, going back to the automotive industry, you think about, you start with raw material inputs and you come up with a finished product. I mean, that's the way continuous bioprocessing ought to work. What we have right now is, of course, experience in upstream production using continuous bioprocessing technologies, unit operations. Not a lot on downstream at all. There's a lot of technologies that are out there and have been promoted and sold commercially for 10 years. The challenge, of course, is to make those commercial and to make those easy to use for operators. In order for the regulatory responsibilities to be met, these technologies have got to be put into the process using expectation that operators are going to need to use these things and implement these technologies in a way that right now it's not related to batch. So they're more complicated. In some of our annual reports, when we ask the industry, where do you identify problems comparing batch and continuous bioprocessing, the complexity is one of the largest gaps. That's where the industry says, I can't necessarily implement this until I understand how my operators are actually going to take it on.
So who are the stakeholders who are interested that continuous bioprocessing moves forward? I would say that there are 4. First of all, I think it's the governments, with the emphasis that this technology and this approach can reduce the costs, then ultimately that will reduce government spending on healthcare overall. Secondly, it's the regulators, because with this approach we will be able to bring more diversified and stratified medicines to market and more quickly. Thirdly, I do think it's the vendors and the equipment manufacturers, because here is an opportunity to singularly differentiate one portfolio of products as compared with the competition. So those are what I would call the three pushers of the technology or the approach, and then obviously the pharma companies are the recipients, and there's a clear pull from them because they understand that the old way of producing monoclonal antibodies is outdated and there is a need for a change and the need for improvement.
The implementation of continuous processing has been far more championed by the innovator companies relative to the CMOs. So those innovator companies are really looking at ways that they can improve their manufacturing processes and making some pretty substantial investments on the development side to understand how to implement continuous manufacturing. And as these technologies develop and they start to refine what they're looking to do, those partnerships between innovator companies and the companies that supply them, manufacture the consumables, as well as the equipment, has really become quite strong.
Now, one very important thing comes into the play, the creativity of the chemist and the chemical engineer. How they create the process, because what they create has a very significant impact on the cost and the product quality.
In terms of new products, most products could be manufactured by continuous processing if that's what you choose to do. There are certainly instances where for very, very low volume products or things where you only make a very small batch once a year that you may still prefer to use a batch process just because of the amount of time and effort you may need to put up front in developing the continuous process. But I think it's really an organizational decision, and the more that you're comfortable and familiar with applying continuous manufacturing technology, the more likely you are to apply that to a broader portion of your portfolio.
So the future of continuous bioprocessing, intensified unit operations, and then using those in a modular fashion, i.e. connecting 2-3 unit operations together to begin with. Then you've got the continuous. So that will also involve inline sensing. How do you orchestrate individual unit operation platforms, one with the next, so that you have the whole process train that's controlled digitally? And then ultimately, how do you acquire data around how the run is going, how the production process is going, so that you have solid and robust batch master records and batch master files in order that the manufacturing stays under CGMP and is compliant with all the regulatory requirements that are out there.
Continuous manufacturing facilities do generate a lot of data. This is one of the advantages, that these are very data-rich applications, very data-rich manufacturing processes, and a lot of this data can be used very productively to improve their procedures, processes, and different companies are using different approaches on how to manage and handle this data.
Oh, I do see a future, but in order that future tomorrow to arrive today, consolidation has to happen, and that's a not very pleasant word, because consolidation means that if I am making an active ingredient or a formulation at, let's say, active at 5 different plants, and I can make it at one single plant, this means I got to shut down those 4 plants, loss of jobs. And that we cannot forget, because that's part of the equation, part of the global situation. Same thing for formulations. See, to me, formulations have the highest hope to go continuous. Maybe we are scared to do it because we do not have the absolute control on the process, or we haven't created that situation. Till we are able to time and time after say that, hey, I have a total command of the process, I cannot justify going there.
State that the industry is at with respect to continuous manufacturing is still very early. As time has progressed, certainly the frequency at which folks are speaking about continuous manufacturing at conferences and it's coming up in discussions with our customers, it's increased, especially probably in the last 2 to 3 years.
We see a lot of benefits in adopting continuous manufacturing processes. Continuous manufacturing naturally lends itself to process development. Product quality can be improved because the processes are better developed, and with the ability to adjust batch size easily, companies will be better able to respond to emergencies, prevent drug shortages. So we see tremendous advantages, and from a cost perspective, companies also could see the benefits of adopting continuous manufacturing. FDA has spent quite a lot of effort in supporting continuous manufacturing to encourage companies, to let them know that the FDA is willing to support the company and help them. This is one of the reasons why CEDA's ETT is extremely valuable in helping companies resolve gaps so that they can actually have fully successful continuous processes.